For 32 years, I built houses with my hands, and the one thing I was proudest of was the 3-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Lane that I paid off the mortgage on before my 65th birthday. Then my wife died of a stroke on a Wednesday morning in March, and by the following Tuesday, my son-in-law had changed the locks. My daughter stood on the porch and told me I had 30 minutes to grab what I could carry. Her husband stood behind her with his arms crossed, wearing a smile that I will never forget for as long as I live. The neighbors watched from their windows. Nobody said a word. That was 11 months ago. I spent those months sleeping in the spare room of a man I barely knew, eating whatever I could afford at the gas station down the street, and trying to understand how the family I had given everything to had turned into strangers overnight. Then, on a Thursday evening in November, a woman in a black coat knocked on the door of that spare room and handed me a manila envelope. She said my name like she had been looking for me for a long time. What happened in the 3 weeks after that knock changed everything, and I mean everything. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know where you're watching from. And tell me this. Have you ever trusted someone completely, someone you raised, someone you loved, and had that trust used against you like a weapon? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Hector Salinas. I am 67 years old. I was a licensed general contractor in the state of Texas for over 3 decades. I poured concrete and hung drywall and replaced rotted subfloors in weather that would stop most men half my age. I was not a wealthy man, but I was a careful one. I saved. I planned. I believed in doing things right the first time, so you did not have to do them twice. My wife, Gloria, was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, every anniversary, and every small kindness anyone had ever shown her. She kept a little notebook by the kitchen phone, where she wrote down things people needed, so she could check on them later. When she died, that notebook was still open on the counter. There were 3 names on the last page. She had been planning to call them that afternoon. Our daughter had married a man named Todd 6 years earlier. I had never liked him, not because of anything I could name specifically, but because of the way he listened. He didn't. He waited for you to stop talking so he could start. He was the kind of man who used words like investment and leverage in casual dinner conversation, who talked about property values the way other men talked about the weather. But my daughter loved him, so I kept my opinion behind my teeth and my smile in place. The morning after Gloria's funeral, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee. I had not slept. The house felt like it was breathing wrong, too quiet, every creak unfamiliar, even though I had lived there for 20 years. My daughter came downstairs alone. Todd was still upstairs, she said. She sat across from me, and she looked at the table instead of at me, and that was when I knew something was coming. She told me the house was in her name. I set my cup down. I looked at her. I said, "That is not right. The house is in my name and your mother's. We bought it together in 1994. She shook her head slowly. She said Todd had talked to a real estate attorney. She said that when Mom got sick 2 years ago, and I had added her name to the deed for estate planning purposes, the way it was worded meant that upon Gloria's death, the property transferred. She slid a document across the table. It had my signature on it. I had signed it at the kitchen table while Gloria was resting upstairs, and I was distracted and exhausted, and the attorney Todd had recommended had told me it was just standard language. Standard language. I stared at my own handwriting on that paper for a long time. She said they needed the house. She said Todd's business was going through a difficult period, and they needed to use the property as collateral. She said she was sorry. She said it like she was apologizing for forgetting to call on my birthday. I told her I needed time to process this. I told her I was still grieving. I told her her mother had been dead for less than 48 hours. Todd came downstairs then. He was dressed for work. He poured himself a cup of coffee from my coffee maker, and he told me, without looking up from his phone, that they would give me 30 days to find somewhere else. He said it like he was doing me a favor. He said the market was good right now, and they did not want to miss the window. I left with 2 suitcases and a toolbox. I want you to understand something. I am not a man who asks for help easily. I spent 40 years being the person other people called when things went wrong. When your furnace died on Christmas Eve, you called me. When the pipe burst in your bathroom at midnight, I was the one who showed up. I did not know how to be on the other side of that equation. I did not know how to sit in a borrowed room in my buddy Frank's house and explain to his wife why I was there. Frank Kowalski had worked with me on commercial builds for 15 years. He was one of the few people who knew the full story without me having to explain it. He and his wife let me use their spare room without asking for anything, and I will owe them for that for the rest of my life. The months I spent in that room were the worst of my life, and I have had some bad months. I watched my savings drain away on an attorney who told me the document was probably enforceable. I stopped eating real meals because I felt too ashamed to sit at someone else's dinner table every night. I woke up at 3 in the morning and lay there listening to the silence of a house that was not mine. I called my daughter twice. She did not call back. What I did not know during those 11 months was that Gloria had been protecting me. She had been protecting me for years, in fact. In the quiet, practical way, she did everything, without announcement, without drama, without any expectation of credit. She had watched Todd for 6 years. She had seen what I was too close to see, and she had made a plan. The woman who knocked on Frank's door that November evening was named Cecily Hargrove. She was an estate attorney, and she was not tall or intimidating. But she had a way of standing very still while she talked that made you feel like every word she said had been considered carefully before it left her mouth. She asked if I was Hector Salinas. I said yes. She handed me an envelope and said, "Your wife hired me 14 months ago." I sat down on Frank's porch steps. It was 40 degrees out, and I did not feel it. 14 months ago, Gloria was already sick, but she had not told me how sick. She had been going to appointments I did not know about, getting assessments, talking to attorneys, putting things in order. She had hired Cecily without telling me because she knew that if she told me, I would have tried to fix it myself, and she did not trust Todd enough to let me try alone. Inside the envelope was a promissory note. 22 years earlier, when Todd had first gotten into real estate development, he had borrowed $47,000 from Gloria's personal savings account to cover a deal that was falling apart. It was money she had inherited from her own mother. The note was signed by Todd. It listed a repayment schedule. Not a single payment had ever been made. It was still legally enforceable. Cecily explained it quietly while I sat on that porch step with the envelope in my hands. The note had a clause. If Todd failed to repay by the date listed, which he had, the debt with compounded interest now totaled over $91,000. Gloria's estate had the right to place a lien on any real property Todd used as collateral, including the house on Birchwood Lane. He had signed a loan agreement with my wife, used the money to save his business, never paid her back, and then taken the house that her own savings had helped build. I pressed the backs of my hands against my eyes for a moment. When I looked up, Cecily was watching me with an expression that was not pity exactly, but close to it. She said, "Mrs. Salinas also left you a letter." I did not open it that night. I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, and I kept it there for 3 days before I could bring myself to read it. I will not repeat what it said, because some things are between a man and his wife. But I will tell you this. She told me she was sorry she had not fought harder for me while she was alive. She told me she trusted me to fight for myself now that she was gone. She told me she loved me every day of her life, even the days she did not say it out loud. I am not ashamed to tell you I sat in Frank's truck in his driveway and wept for an hour. When I was done, I went inside and I told Cecily I was ready to hear the rest of the plan. The first hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Cecily filed the lien. The moment that document was recorded at the county clerk's office, Todd could not use the house on Birchwood Lane as collateral for anything. His current financing deal, which I would later learn, was already stretched so thin it was nearly transparent, collapsed within 10 days. The business partner he had been working with pulled out of the project. His bank called in a short-term note he had been expecting to roll over. I know all of this because my daughter called me. She called on a Sunday. I almost did not pick up. I am glad I did, not because the conversation was easy, but because I heard something in her voice I had not heard in months. It was the sound of someone who had been told one version of a story for a long time, finally standing close enough to smell the smoke. She said, "Dad, I need to ask you something." I said, "Ask it." She said, "Did Mom lend Todd money a long time ago?" I said, "I did not know about it until recently." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He told me he paid it back." He showed me a receipt. I did not say anything for a few seconds. Then I said, "Honey, do you want to see what I have?" She came to Frank's house the following Saturday. She sat at the kitchen table, where Frank's wife had put out coffee and a plate of cookies neither of us touched, and I laid out every document Cecily had given me. The promissory note, the repayment schedule, the bank records showing no corresponding deposits, the lien filing, the letter from the estate attorney Todd had recommended to me, which Cecily had obtained a copy of, showing that the deed language had been changed from what I was told it said. My daughter did not speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was very controlled, the way people sound when they are holding something together with both hands. She said, "He told me you were confused. He told me you had been forgetting things since Mom got sick. He said it would be better for you to be somewhere smaller, easier to manage." I said, "I built that house. I put in the electrical myself. I know exactly where every wire runs." She looked at the documents. Then she looked at me. Then she started to cry quietly, with her hands in her lap, and I reached across the table and held onto them, because that is all I knew how to do. She moved out of the house on Birchwood Lane 2 weeks later. Todd's response to the lien was predictable. He hired an attorney of his own, a man named Patterson, who wore cufflinks and talked too fast and made arguments that sounded compelling until Cecily quietly dismantled them one by one. Todd's position was that the promissory note was informal, that Gloria had forgiven the debt verbally, that there was no legitimate claim against the property. Cecily's position was that the note was a legally executed document, witnessed and notarized, and that verbal forgiveness of a debt requires evidence, which Todd did not have, because the debt had never been forgiven. Gloria had kept every bank statement. She had kept a copy of the note in a safe deposit box at a bank. Todd did not know she had over the course of years, quietly and deliberately assembled the case against him, not out of malice, but out of love, because she wanted to make sure that if something happened to her, I would not be left with nothing. The hearing itself was not dramatic the way you might expect. It was a small room in a county courthouse. There was a judge who looked like she had been sitting on that bench for a long time and had no patience for theatre. Todd sat at his table in an expensive suit, and I sat at mine in the jacket I had worn to Gloria's funeral because it was the best I owned. Cecily laid out the case in the same quiet, precise way she did everything. She did not raise her voice. She did not use adjectives she did not need. When Patterson stood up to argue that the note was unenforceable, the judge looked at the notarization date, looked at the bank records and asked him a single question. She said, "Counselor, do you have any written documentation of this alleged forgiveness?" He said no, but he had a sworn affidavit from Todd. She said, "I see." Then she made a note and asked Cecily to continue. Todd testified. He looked composed until Cecily asked him, in the mildest possible voice, to explain the receipt he had shown my daughter. He said it was a record of a conversation, not an actual transaction. She asked him to define what he meant by that. He said it was a document he had prepared to summarize an oral agreement. She asked him who had witnessed this oral agreement. He said no one. She asked him why, if the debt had been forgiven, he had not disclosed it in any of his financial filings from that year forward. He said the amount was immaterial. The judge did not look up from her notes when she said, "Mr. Patterson, I'm going to need a moment with the timeline here." It took 4 minutes. She found in favor of the estate. The lien was upheld. The house on Birchwood Lane was ordered sold, with the proceeds going first to satisfy the debt and compounded interest, then to the estate, with the remainder, if any, going to Todd. Cecily had calculated it precisely. After the debt was satisfied and attorney fees were accounted for, Todd would receive approximately $4,200 from the sale of a house he had taken from me. I sat in that courtroom and I did not cheer. I did not feel triumphant, not the way I thought I might. I felt something more like the moment after a long storm when the wind finally stops. A kind of bone-deep quiet. My daughter was sitting 2 rows behind me. She had come alone. When the judge finished speaking and the room began to move again, I turned around. She was looking at her hands. Then she looked up at me, and I saw the same expression I used to see on her face when she was a little girl and had done something wrong and did not know how to say so. I nodded at her once. She nodded back. We had a long road ahead of us, her and me. We still do. Trust is not rebuilt the way a foundation is, layer by layer in the same order. It moves differently, slower and less predictably. But we were at least standing in the same direction again. Now, before I tell you what happened with the money and where I am today, I want to ask you something. On a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised were you that Gloria had been planning this the whole time? Drop your number in the comments. I want to know, and stay with me, because what happened after the sale is the part I still have trouble believing myself. The house sold in 3 weeks. It was November, not an ideal time, but the market in our part of Texas had stayed stubborn, and the offer came in fast. I was not present for the closing. I did not want to be. Cecily called me when it was done. The estate received $78,400 after satisfying the debt and all associated costs. It was not the kind of money that changes your life dramatically, not in one move. But Cecily had been thinking about that too, because that is what Gloria had hired her to do. Gloria had also left a second instruction. She had researched assisted living facilities in our county 2 years before she died, not for herself but for me, in case I ever needed one, in case things got hard. She had not liked what she found. She had written 3 pages of notes about what was missing, what was wrong, what the people in those places needed that they were not getting. She had given those notes to Cecily with a simple instruction. She said, "If there's anything left, use it to start something better." I read those 3 pages sitting at Frank's kitchen table on a Saturday morning while his wife made eggs. Neither of us ate. My wife's handwriting, her careful, practical observations, the name of a resident she had spoken to on a tour who had told her the loneliest part was not the illness. It was the afternoons when nobody came. I folded those pages and put them in my jacket next to her letter. Then I called a man I had worked with 20 years ago, a retired pharmacist named August Bellamy, who had been trying for 6 years to get a small residential care home off the ground in our county and kept running into zoning issues and financing gaps. I had helped him look at a building once, years back when he first got the idea, and I had told him his foundation was solid. He had laughed and said he wished his business plan was as solid as his foundation. August answered on the second ring. When I explained what I had, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Hector, how soon can you get here?" It took 8 months, not 6 weeks, because permits take as long as they take, and there is no shortcut worth taking when you are dealing with people's safety. I know that better than most. But we got there. We opened the Birchwood Residential Care Home in September, and yes, I named it for the street, because I am not a man who forgets where things come from. We have 16 residents. We have a staff that I interviewed personally, not for their credentials alone, but for the way they talk to people, whether they made eye contact, whether they slowed down when someone spoke slowly to them. We have an activities room with windows on 3 sides, because Gloria's notes said the other place had no natural light, and the afternoons were the hardest part. I live in a small house 3 blocks away that I rent from a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Porterfield, who keeps tomatoes in her backyard and leaves the extra ones on my porch without being asked. It is not the house on Birchwood Lane. It is a good house. Some mornings I sit on the front steps with my coffee and I think about the fact that I am 67 years old and starting something new, and I do not feel old when I think about it. I feel like a man who has work to do. My daughter volunteers at the care home on Saturday afternoons. She drives the residents to their appointments and sits with the ones who don't have visitors. She does not ask me to forgive her. She just shows up. That is more than I expected, and I have decided it is enough. Todd lost the business 6 months after the house. I do not say that with satisfaction. I say it because it is what happened when a man builds on a foundation he did not actually own. Eventually the ground shifts and the structure reveals itself. I spent 40 years watching buildings show you the truth about how they were made. People are not so different. I want to tell you something I learned from all of this, not as advice, because I am not your pastor or your financial planner, but as a man who went through it. The cruelest part of being betrayed by someone you love is not the money. It is not the house or the documents or the legal fees. It is the way it makes you doubt your own perception. Todd did not just take a house. He spent 6 years slowly, quietly convincing my daughter that her father was confused, was fragile, was not to be trusted with his own affairs. He did it so gently and so consistently that by the time Gloria died, she half believed it herself. That kind of damage does not show up in a courtroom. There is no document that captures it. What saved me was not my attorney, though Cecily was extraordinary. What saved me was my wife, who had trusted her own eyes when no one was watching, and who had spent years quietly, carefully making sure that the truth would survive her. Pay attention to the people in your life who do things without being asked, who plan without announcing, who love you in the practical, unglamorous way of someone who is actually paying attention. Those are the ones worth everything. I am still a builder. I wake up most mornings and go to the care home and walk the perimeter the way I used to walk a job site, looking for what needs attention. I check the caulking around the windows and the grout in the bathroom tile and the weather stripping on the back door. I fix what is broken before it becomes a problem. That is the only way I know how to love something. You show up, you pay attention, you do the work before the water gets in. Gloria knew that about me. She spent 40 years married to a man who fixed things, and when she needed something fixed, she planned for it herself and left me the tools. I am going to go pick up my daughter in about an hour. We are going to drive out to the care home together and bring the residents some of Mrs. Porterfield's tomatoes, which are absolutely more than anyone asked for and exactly right. If this story found something in you, leave a comment and tell me. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever had someone love you, like that, quietly, with a plan, without telling you. Tell me if you've ever had to start over at an age when starting over is supposed to be off the table. I'll read everyone. And if you think someone else needs to hear this tonight, share it with them. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do for someone is let them know they are not alone in the hard part. Thank you for staying with me until the end.